I'd like to say thanks to Matt and Ray and to Grace for inviting me here, and to the two ladies who sang a beautiful song, which I think I wasn't involved in the choice of that at all, but I think it was entirely appropriate, where they sang about turning despair into hope, because I think that's really the big issue in our world at this time. I think all of us are aware of all the destruction that's happening to nature. The planet is really reeling, not just from climate change, but also from the sixth mass extinction and the disruption of essential ecosystem processes everywhere. And in the midst of that, which is what tends to garner all the attention, the media spotlight and everything, in the midst of that, there's many people, probably like all of you here, people I work with in Scotland, who are actually attempting something completely new. It's about giving life back to nature again, giving life back to the planet. And I've been involved in that work in Scotland since about the early 1980s. I became aware of the plight of the Caledonian forest, as it's called, the native pine woods, which used to cover 1.5 million hectares. Today, there's about 13,000 hectares left. It's about 1%. And that 1% is what I call geriatric forest. It's old trees, 200, 250, 300 years old. The oldest one in Scotland, the oldest pine, was dated at 550 years, about 20 years ago. And there's no young trees. It's like going to an old people's home. Beautiful beings had long lives, reaching the end of it, dying naturally. Nothing wrong with that process. But what's wrong is there's no new life coming to replace it. And that story is being repeated all over the world. And it's happening here in Ireland as well. So I became aware of this in the early 1980s. And I live at Findhorn, which some of you may know. For those of you who don't, it's an intentional community that started in 1962. 3 adults and 3 children. 2 of the adults, 2 women, Eileen Caddy and Dorothy McLean, were what are called sensitives. So they meditated a lot, and they received what they termed guidance in their meditation. And Dorothy McLean in particular communicated with what she felt, what she termed the devas. Deva being a Sanskrit word that means shining one. And she felt she was contacting the archetypal essence or intelligence of each plant species. And she got messages from them. Sometimes they were very prosaic. They were growing a garden. That's probably louder for everybody at the back. They were growing a garden. Sometimes it was the vegetables need water today. But other times it was much more profound and philosophical about the need for humans, particularly us Westerners, to develop a renewed sense of relationship with the rest of nature. So that was what attracted me to Findhorn, and I worked in one of the gardens for 4 years growing vegetables. I've never received a comparable message in the meditation. Perhaps I'm not sensitive enough, but I get a gut feeling. And going out into these old remnants of the forest, I first went there in 1979. And I was kind of blown away because I grew up in Scotland sort of thinking it was mostly a treeless country and that was natural. But I'd been to big forests in Canada. I'd travelled extensively in South America in my early 20s. I'd been in untouched, undisturbed ecosystems. And that had touched me deeply. I felt a great sense of love and appreciation, wonder and joy in those places where nature had free and full expression. So when I found out about this forest in Scotland, I was like, oh, this is a little bit like Canada. But as soon as I started spending time there, I felt like the trees were calling out for help. I never got a message, but it was this sense of do something. We're dying. We're dying of old age and our children are not able to grow. As I say, it was like going to an old people's home, the geriatric forest. So in 1986, I was the main organizer of a big conference at Findhorn that was called One Earth, A Call to Action. And that was the year of the Chernobyl nuclear accident, which some of you perhaps remember. Some of you perhaps are born since then, but it was a big thing. And the environment was very much in people's awareness. And this conference for a week was based on the premise that we know what the problems of the world are. They're in the media, they're in our face all the time. We also know what the solutions are. But nobody or very few people are putting the solutions into practice. because they run against the dominant paradigm of endless economic growth and let's squeeze every last drop of profit out of every ecosystem that we can. So the conference was based on that premise, and we only had 5 speakers during the week. It was an experiential event, and the central day, the Wednesday, was what we called Transformation Day. So there were no lectures that day. Instead, we offered transformational experiences. So we had things like fire walking, sweat lodge, native Aboriginal rituals from Australia, despair and empowerment work. And the idea was to help people make a personal shift to do something positive for the planet. And in the final session, we invited anybody who felt inspired to stand up in our auditorium in front of 300 people and make a positive commitment to do something for the earth. Not everybody got up, it was entirely voluntary. Some people got up and said things like they were going to dig up their lawn and grow organic vegetables. I stood up and said, I commit myself to launch a project to restore this forest in Scotland. And I can laugh at it now because when I stood there, I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no experience. I had no training in ecology or forestry. I had a degree in electronics, which I've never ever used. I had no access to land. I had no resources. And I was starting on a physical level with nothing. But actually, when I look back now, I realized I was starting with the most important thing, because I had a heart connection with this land, with this forest. I felt it was calling out for help, and I felt I could do something. For several years I've been going there, and I was thinking, why is the Forestry Commission not doing something? They own this land. They'd actually fenced off a piece in the 60s to keep the deer out and the sheep out, and young trees were growing in profusion. Why are they not doing it everywhere else? Or why is the Government Nature Conservation Agency not doing anything? This is a site of special scientific interest. They should be doing it. Somebody needs to do something about this. And eventually I realized, well, maybe I'm that somebody. So I took that step and I founded this charity, Trees for Life, which I worked with for 31 years. And we were successful in helping regenerate many areas. After a number of years, we bought 10,000 acres of land ourselves. And we've brought back some of the species there. And we're part of a whole movement of helping to restore the forests in Scotland. And we've now got organisations like Rewilding Britain, Rewilding Europe, the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforests. They're proliferating all the time. And I'm part of something that's much bigger. And I believe all of you here are perhaps part of that too. Some of you may not know it yet, but you're here because you've been drawn by the theme of this event. And the question is, what can you do about it? And what I've discovered is, if I really follow my heart and allow my love and care for nature to guide me and inspire me, I attract like-minded people, I attract donations, I attract support, I attract opportunities. And I'm part of the birth of something new. I've traveled a lot in my life. I've visited people in other parts of the world who are restoring other ecosystems because they've seen the same thing. The planet is being degraded. Ecosystems are dying. There's a man called Daniel Jansen, some of you may have heard of, who's got a project to restore the dry tropical forests of Costa Rica. I spent several days with him about the same time, actually, and got inspired by what he was doing. And there's people doing that in many parts of the world. And I now have a vision which I wanted to spend a couple of minutes with you for an alternative future to the one which we are offered. What's the future that's presented to most of us? Well, if you look at governments and everything, it's economic growth. More economic growth, that's it. That's what dominates all the policies and the direction and everything. And that's what's driving the destruction on the planet now. And of course, the growth is highly unequal. It's concentrated in rich countries like Britain or Ireland or Europe or the US, and it's often at the expense of the poorer countries. And there doesn't seem to be any viable alternative to that. So my alternative to that is what I believe has to become the first shared task for all humanity. We've never had a shared goal that transcends national boundaries, that unites all peoples, all cultures, all nations. I believe the time has come for that. And for me, that goal, that shared task is restoring the earth. It's reviving degraded ecosystems, bringing back habitat for our fellow species, and reintegrating humans into the rest of the web of life that we have over many generations consciously and unconsciously separated ourselves from by living in buildings, living in cities, surrounding ourselves by concrete and neon, so we lose touch with the daily cycle of light and darkness, heating our houses so we lose touch with the cycles of the seasons, and we live in this insulated bubble. Many people totally disconnected from the impact of their lives. So my journey, my personal journey, has been one of, and I've wrestled with these questions of what can I do to make a meaningful difference in the world, probably since I was an early teenager. I don't remember past that, but certainly since then I always had this feeling the world could be a better place, and what can I do to make a difference? So I found it through this call of nature that I felt, the call of the planet for help. And I sometimes look at the most famous picture of the Earth that was taken from space by the first astronauts to get away from the planet, Apollo 8 in, I think, 1968. When they went out and circled the moon, they took a photograph of the Earth from space, the whole planet. And they took many, but the one that's almost always used shows the continent of Africa. And you can see North Africa where the Sahara is, because there's no clouds over it. You can see the Kalahari in the south. And the most prominent feature in that photograph is desert. And although deserts are natural ecosystems on the planet, most of what's visible in that photograph is desertified areas. North Africa 2,000 years ago was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. It provided the food for that empire. And Rome, like all the other empires that preceded it, Greece and Persia and so forth, they depleted their natural resources and collapsed. That's why they declined. My country, Britain, built an empire, and it didn't collapse quite as seriously because we then went out after exhausting our own forests and everything else and started depleting Africa and all the other places that we colonized. And of course, today our global culture, our global civilization is in the last untouched ecosystems of the planet. The Amazon, the Congo, Borneo, the Antarctic Ocean, all those places that have remained relatively intact are being heavily exploited right now. So there is no future in my world view for this culture of endless economic growth. The only place where endless growth occurs in nature is in the disease that we call cancer. And when people get cancer, tumours grow, and they consume eventually, if they're not treated, if they're not dealt with, they consume their host body, and that's why people die of cancer. So in my view, our industrial culture has become cancerous on the planet, and it's driving the world to destruction. And we urgently need an alternative to that. And I believe that alternative is actually being demonstrated and piloted all over the world right now, out of the media's eye, out of public attention. It's people quietly getting on, or sometimes not so quietly, with the work here at Home Tree, with the work of Trees for Life in Scotland, with numerous other organisations that I could mention that I'm aware of. It's relatively invisible to the mainstream world. It's not in the news, it's not on television. It's just people quietly getting on, allowing their hearts to guide them and their love to be translated into care for nature. And that's the other thing I want to say, and this is quite radical, but it might resonate with some of you, I hope, which is one of the secrets to Findhorn and the community there, because those founders, when they started acting on their messages that they received in their meditations and giving their love to the garden that we were growing, produced these remarkable results. Findhorn became famous in the 60s because they were growing cabbages that weighed 40 pounds, whatever that is in kilos, 18 kilos or something, out of what was sand, because Findhorn was founded in sand dunes on the coast of Scotland. And that happened because they were giving their love to the plants. Now, I think many people see this without perhaps realizing what's happening. In English, in Britain, we have a saying, somebody has a special connection with plants, they have a green thumb. People know that expression? Some of you might have heard of it. Yeah, so you might have an elderly aunt who dotes over her houseplants, or, who cares for her tomatoes in her greenhouse and produces, these wondrous healthy plants. I actually think green thumb is the wrong term. It should be green heart, because it's the heart that makes the difference. The thumb only does the work of the heart. It's actually that quality of love. And the deep knowing that I've come to is that love strengthens and amplifies the life force of whatever it is directed to. Love strengthens and amplifies the life force of whatever it is directed to. And I think many people experience this without realizing it. People love their pets. Parents love their children. It's nice to see children here. Children grow up happier when they're surrounded by love. Pets thrive in an atmosphere of love. Plants thrive in an atmosphere of love. And that principle, that value, is what we have to base our culture on. And that's, to me, what restoring the earth is all about. It's about not looking at the earth as an endless source of raw materials that we can profit from, but that it is our fellow species on a shared evolutionary journey in the cosmos. And that by giving our love to the earth, to our plants, our trees, our animals, our ecosystems, we can help further that growth and development. Just as when we love each other, I feel nourished and nurtured, I feel seen, I feel supported when I'm loved by my wife or my parents or whoever. That happens, that translates into everything that love is directed towards. So to me, that's the big picture. That is what the work of restoring the earth is all about. And to me, it's not a coincidence that that is happening at the same time as the destruction, because the destruction is the wake-up call. It's the thing that is forcing people to say, we need to change. Something needs to be done differently. And the balance is, of course, the dynamic is, can we get enough people to change in time before we dip too far in terms of destroying the fabric of the planet and the ecosystems that support us all? And that's the dance that we're involved in right now, in which I invite all of you to participate consciously in. And I'm just about out of time, so I want to leave you with the thought of what really speaks to your heart, each one of you. If there were no obstacles, if there were no problems in the world, what would you really do to contribute to that change that is needed? And what I would say is, if you come up with an answer to that, it may seem ridiculous, preposterous, impossible, beyond your reach. But if it's there, if it's something that has a spark in you, then it is achievable. Because when I stood in front of 300 people and said, I'm going to launch a project to restore the Caledonian forest, I had no idea how I was going to do that. It took me 3 years to raise money, to make contact with landowners, to educate myself. And the first action was protecting 50 trees with tubes. But that grounded the vision in practice. And that is the crucial thing, going back to that conference, a call to action. We know the problems, we know the solutions. What's missing is putting it into practice. So whenever people come together and do something positive and ground that vision of restoring the earth, of restoring a forest, of healing a landscape, it acts as a magnet. It attracts interest, it attracts support, just like all of you have come, drawn by Home Tree here. We all have that power. I'm no different to anybody else. All I've done is decide to commit my life to following my passion and taking a deep breath and just going for it and following up every lead, every thought, and making it happen. We all have access to that power. It's listening to the call of our hearts to where does my passion lie? What do I really care about? And then acting on that. So I encourage you all to take full advantage of this time together, these couple of days. Talk with people here. Come and talk with me. I'm giving a more detailed talk about the practical work tomorrow. Welcome to come along to that. And really ask yourself, what can you take away from this? What can you do? Because the world needs everybody who cares to step up and do something now. We each have a unique contribution to make that perhaps nobody else can offer. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you for your attention.